How does IGA differ from IAM? What's the main differences there? And what's the origins of IGA?
Well, the thing here is, of course, every single kind of analyst house has their own language set. So I don't think that there is one single language set that is correct and the others are wrong. But in most cases, IAM is the broader picture, while the IGA is the join and move and leave flows, the provisioning flows, and the access certification and toxic combinations and segregation of duty. That is how you usually see in most companies how these words are being used. And it is a bit interesting. If you look at the IGA, originally, of course, I would say that the first implementations is basically about we have a large hospitality company or a large fast food or similar. We need to provision or retail. We need to provision a lot of users in a similar way.
Welcome to the Security by Default podcast, the podcast where firewalls are hot, passwords are long and strong, and cybercriminals are probably listening to. I'm your host, Joseph Carson, ethical hacker, security nerd, and the guy who reads the terms and conditions so you don't have to. Each episode will break down the weird, wild world of cybersecurity, minus the jargon, and plus a few laughs. Whether you're a pro or just here to figure out what the hell Zero Trust really means, you're in the right place. Let's get secure and have a little fun on the way too.
My name's Joe Carson. I'm the host of the show, and it's always great to be here every 2 weeks with you to share some of the latest trends, news, and what's happening around security, and also some of the kind of latest kind of innovations and awesome guests on the show. And I'm brought and joined with an amazing guest who I've known for quite a few years now, and always really enjoy listening to his insights and ideas and innovations. So welcome to the podcast. Welcome, Martin. Martin, if you want to give the audience a bit background about who you are, what you do, and how you get into the industry.
Yeah, so I've been in the IAM industry for about almost 25 years now. I'm originally from Sweden, lived in Germany, UK, so now in the Netherlands. And my day job, I'm the product lead for identity and access at IKEA. And we do round meatballs and flat packages around the world. That is our core business. And we're also the best way to test a relationship as well. Bring your partner to IKEA and see if you survive that, and then you know that it's...
I've been there quite a few times recently myself, so yeah, I can definitely vouch for the experience. It's definitely good marriage counseling, and also meatballs for sure. So how did you get into the industry? What was you've been doing this for quite a long time. Was this something you started with, or is it something that you kind of evolved into?
Yes, I was working as an administrator in the computer labs during university, and that was back in when NT4 was brand new and Ethernet cables was, wow, we'll go from to Ethernet. So, and then when I got my degree, I started working for an ERP vendor as basically their security person. And a large part of that was then basically integrating the ERP systems with LDAP to be able to do authentication.
That's our good old friend LDAP, which is still around today. So today's theme of the episode is really to talk about, IGA has been something it's been around for a long time. And when I refer to IGA, it's Identity Governance Administration. How does IGA differ from IAM? What's the main differences there? And what's the origins of IGA?
Well, the thing here is, of course, every single kind of analyst house has their own language set. So I don't think that there is one single language set that is correct and the others are wrong. But in most cases, IAM is the broader picture, while the IGA is the join and move and leave flows, the provisioning flows, and the access certification and toxic combinations and segregation of duty. That is how you usually see in most companies how these words are being used. And it is a bit interesting. If you look at the IGA, originally, of course, I would say that the first implementations is basically about we have a large hospitality company or a large fast food or similar. We need to provision or retail. We need to provision a lot of users in a similar way. Then you need an IGA system to provision. If you have 1,000 stores, you need a store manager, you need a few shift managers, you need perhaps different department heads, and then you need the people who is the manager on duty, and then you need the actual workers, and they're quite similar. So then you can have an IGA system that just automates that provisioning that gives everyone the right access. But if you look at what kind of made IGA more than a kind of a very expensive product for very large companies, of course, Active Directory was kind of the first kind of start for IGA for many back in the 90s. but that was more of a directory centric. And then you have the systems that populated Active Directory. So if you have an ADC today, that can be connected back to the systems that we configured 20 years ago, and it basically sucked in data, did some processing, and then pushed it out again. But what really made IGA to go from a kind of a system that you mostly used in big companies who could afford automating was really the Enron scandal, where you suddenly had a big need for the person who had the money, the CTO, that could choose between either you take control of your IT environment or you go to prison. And most CTOs do not want to go to prison, and most CFOs do not want to go to prison, and they had the money. So then you suddenly started selling a lot of IGA systems.
Absolutely. Even my own experience was mostly the segregation of duties, or sometimes referred to as separation of duties in different terminologies globally. It was around physical access. It wasn't really in the early 2000s. It had never really done in the digital side of things. It was, you got a credential. It was given. Sometimes it was cloned from the colleague that you were doing the same role as, and maybe they've been around for a couple of years or even more, and they may have inherited many privileges. Now, for me, one of the things is that I had, a credential that had access to completely everything. But we had segregation of duties meant that when I was in the data center, I would go from cage to cage, doing different tasks. And I would go into one cage, which would be one organization. Maybe it was a manufacturing organization, do my tasks, make the configuration changes, upgrade the software, do some hardware repairs, and then move on to the next cage. There was a team that came after me that did all the auditing of all of my activities and work. So that was basically, we were not allowed to physically socialize with the other team. Actually, it was a proper, and it was from that legal perspective, is that we were not allowed to audit our own work. And we also had to show and prove to our customers that we were basically making sure we were doing it with the right controls and the right regulations and compliances in mind. But that was physical, and it wasn't really digital. To your point, I think as things like Active Directory evolved, and we started getting into much more, let's say, away from the static policies type of, because a lot of organizations really focus on just the joiner, the joiner focus, getting people productive, and they did a really poor job at the leaving or even the change, moving within the organization. So what's some of the main challenges when we talk about IGA in the last couple of years? Let's say, where does it fall short? What's the challenges? What's it not capable of doing that it should have?
Well, I think the biggest challenge is the simple fact that the IGA is a system that has a number of potential key stakeholders. So like you said, you basically have the plumbers of the organization, and at the end of the day, the managers, because if you have a joiner event and someone has started as just a contractor, if they don't get the right accounts to be able to work, they cost, 1,000 euros a day or whatever they cost. That is a big problem quickly. And then the manager quickly finds you and go like, yes, I would like to have my manager working, my new contractor working. On the other hand, you see the big compliance-driven part, where I have a friend of mine runs IAM in the financial sector. And there, the IAM team spends 80% of their time doing compliance reporting. And on the third hand, you see also, of course, the rise of the identity security. So to control the attack surface by removing users who no longer work for the company, both because they left and therefore they're probably good at it, they shouldn't have access anymore. And just the risk that if you have a lot of targets sitting there, it's much easier for the attacker to get in.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things is, attackers, what I've found is that you're absolutely spot on. The way we work today has evolved quite a lot in the last 10, 15 years, even the last 5 years, where, I think it was really that, late 2010, roughly to 2015, or bring your own device became a big, kind of push where employees brought their own devices into the workplace, and also meant connectivity into a lot of employees could work on the road quite a bit, to and from the office then. And then, of course, the last 5 years has been working hybrid or remotely for many employees. So that dynamic workforce, the way we work today, has evolved quite a bit, meaning that identity has become a massive important part of that ability to, provide access and make it secure as well. And also the threat landscape has changed quite a lot, where it used to be where attackers, really focus around application vulnerabilities to gain access. But now basically in that evolution of the evolving workforce, actually attackers are now attacking that workforce, that remote employee, those employees, accounts that have become stale, that have not had credentials changed in the last 2 years. So absolutely, there's a massive changing in how we work today than how we would have worked in the past. And also, I think even going back a few years, employees would have stayed with the company for much longer as well. So you would have had that joiner would have been something of a very common method, but moving in the organization, yes, they would get promotions, but leaving was something that was not something that was so common. I think the only place I've seen that being a very high focus was such in education, healthcare sometimes as well, where you've had that high retention, high turnover staff. If you look at education, students and lectures come and go quite frequently. In healthcare, people move around different hospitals and different locations. So that became a big priority. So absolutely, I think, now we've seen that area become a kind of a high focus. I've seen, former times where colleagues of mine in previous companies where they may have left, they get acquired 2 years later or a year later. And when they come back in, their credential that they had when they left was still there, still valid, still functional. And I think that's the risk. And I think that's why definitely IGA has become a massive importance for organization. And also regulation has evolved quite a lot. If you look at, NIST, you look at GDPR has a big impact into it. HIPAA, SOX, PCI compliance in the financial space, they definitely, and to your point, we have seen it, definitely in many organizations, it can fall under governance, GRC. IGA can be placed under different areas. It can be placed under the governance risk side of the business, which could be a legal function. It could be part of the identity part of the organization, which is really about managing the access. And sometimes it can even fall under security as well, because it could be the control side of things. Where do you see, IGA typically today? Where does it fall under in your experience? Where's the best place for it to fit in the structure of the organization?
This is actually one of my favorite questions I ask when I have an audience in a conference or similar. Is how many of you report into the CISO? Well, first you have to ask how many is the end user organizations. Then you can ask how many are in the report to the CISO. And 50% seems to be reporting into the CISO, and it seems to be increasing. What you do see there is, of course, there's a couple of changes. So one important part is that the AI makes it possible for the attackers to craft beautiful phishing emails.
Absolutely.
And that does mean that things that, old rules that how you can spot a phishing email. Like I got a phishing email to my private account today that had a Gmail account went to a Gmail address that went for one of the logistics providers. That was not very hard to spot. But you can really see, and when you work with people, you can see that when you do your purple team and your red teams, you see these beautifully crafted emails, and AI really helps it writing these. And it's very easy to fall for them. What we see then is that you get the tools are really good on how to take over sessions today, and then you have a compromise, a credential identity. Then you need to spot it and stop them. And that is not an easy. ITDR is definitely not easy today. But that's one of the big kind of growth market I see
Absolutely.
You can see generally for the IGA systems. And it's also a very interesting case so IGA has traditionally been either that you're provisioning centric, or if you look at the systems that kind of were new 15 years ago, they were often very governance centric, and they provided a good governance platform. But we now see should these platforms move into becoming security centric, and it's not self-evident that it should be. So it's an interesting discussion as well around for the vendors, how much of your total development budget you want to spend on becoming ITDR centric.
Absolutely. I think that was actually one of my favorite talks in the past couple of years on this topic was from Pamela Dingle and Alex from Microsoft. They did a fantastic talk about when Pamela took it from here's the identity, enablement, productivity focus, and here's all the things we want to be able to make sure that people have access to the things they need to be able to be productive and efficient and effective. And then Alex took us down the security, which was actually completely opposite of the productivity side. And I always thought it was I enjoyed the way that they presented it and delivered it, because it really made you think about, sometimes they are a bit conflicting, if you want to focus on the productivity side, that IGA can make it be much more autonomous, much more automated. Absolutely. But when you put the security in place, it can actually be the friction side of things. It causes friction to employees.
Yeah. And there you really need to look at you can't have as much friction everywhere. The cost of having friction for the many is very, very high. On the other hand, on your tier 0 accounts, you probably should have some friction there.
Absolutely.
So that also means that a lot of the tech that you roll out, so let's say that, for example, it's very clear that we are heading towards phishing resistant MFA solutions, primarily with passkeys, and kind of the top of the chain there is the hardware-based, which are the hardest one to hack. And you need to figure out, like, how do you roll that out? Because if you roll it out in your entire organization, your support desk is most likely going to drown. So the general thing when you talk to people, I think the conclusion is that, well, let's start with the tier 0 and go to tier 1 and then continue outwards. And then use the kind of right tool at the right time. And what you need to do in ITDR is trying to get as much signal as possible. So in addition to, you have the devices, do you control the devices, or do you use bring your own device? So then you don't really control the devices, but you have the ability to see that someone is using a different device. You have the ability to see, okay, for large populations of frontline workers, if you are a manufacturer or if you're a retailer, there you, for example, could use egress IPs from networks. Yeah, is it perfect? No, but it is definitely you have to think more of in speed bumps. And we have seen it that, yes, it sounds stupid, but it actually really can be very effective to make the attacker slow down a bit.
Absolutely.
And then on top of that, you then put the ITDR to recognize when something is outside of your norm. But the two main problems with ITDR is that, firstly, the signal to noise ratio is absurd. We're talking about 0.01% or so of the total events are actual real events for a good system. And the second part is the fact that today you see there's going to be a very interesting at the Gartner IM in London in about a month. We're there, a month and a half. There's going to be another interop. So I'm really looking forward to that. But you still have a situation that, yes, you can do it within one stack. But if you happen to buy the ITDRs from, let's say, from Cisco, who bought an ITDR vendor, and you have your IDP from Okta, and you have something else from somewhere else, like IGA, it still is hard to kind of exchange information in a cost-efficient manner. Until we really have gotten to the same place as kind of SAML or IDC, SCIM of adoption, this is very challenging if you need to do it cost-efficient.
Absolutely. The interoperability, if you were between those solutions becomes definitely challenging. And that's, you want to make sure that, doing it in a phased approach and making sure you're doing it really well, and having those integrations. A lot of them do come with APIs, but it's almost like a build yourself. The data exchange between them. So I think for many organizations, interoperability becomes very, very key, because that means that you have less resources to maintain it once you get it working together in tandem. I almost call this like putting an orchestra together.
Yeah.
And if you don't get it the right kind of harmony, it's going to sound really awful.
Yeah, and you really see that. I think it's another product family is going to come in either as a module to the existing product or as a freestanding product is ITDR orchestration. You buy this, you get ITDR functionality in lots of different places, and you somehow have to get the signals together. And one of the challenges is that the classical SIEM platforms that were built for network-based recognition, they aren't really that good at identity yet.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What things how is IGA modernizing? What's the steps? How is it getting? What significant areas, as organizations and vendors looking to make improvements in that area?
So I think what has happened over the last 10 years is the rise of the cloud-based IGA stacks. So 10 years ago, they were really lightweight, and you couldn't really, you could use them if you were a quite simple and quite modern company, which made a lot of sense. If you look at the big stacks, I would say that in many cases, the cloud offering has kind of surpassed the on-premise offering today. And what you do see is that you have a lot more modern features come first to cloud. And this is a little bit of the nature of, especially Microsoft has done a really good job in having this concept of the private preview, the public preview, and then GA for something. But it does mean that if you have a good idea, can kind of take it to in a private preview and see. And the customers knows that, this will be supported for 3 months. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And then.
And it's when you have a cloud base in platform scenarios, it is a switch of on off. And in a lot of cases, you can either, I can try it, see if I like it, if it's ready. If not, you can, turn it off with a click of a button and, move it until release 2 comes along.
Which is very different for how it works on the on-premise, because they usually have perhaps 12 months, 18 months, 2 years of just planning time. And then you develop the thing, you spec it, you develop it, you test it, and then you deploy it. And then someone has to take it and install it on your platform. So it's often that if you have a great idea today in a traditional IGA setup, it will take 2, 3, perhaps even 4 years until it's actually implemented at a client.
Absolutely. It's the speed to adoption is hugely different, and it's moving, especially also the way it's designed in cloud. It becomes micro-segmentation, microservices. It's literally just, sometimes switching a service out, and the workflows and workloads as well, meaning that the speed to kind of adoption is so much more quicker. And also it means, speed to securing those systems is much quicker as well. And also the kind of resources of maintaining a lot of the underlying requirements and stack and hardware and, to maintain as well. Also kind of, that kind of moves away from having those dependencies.
And then you have, obviously, the other big change that's kind of almost ebbing out now is that the concept of used to be that there were IGA vendors, there were PAM vendors, and there were access IDP vendors, and they were, they never overlapped. And now basically they all invaded each other's territories.
Absolutely.
So they've all created the platform of that where you're supposed to use it for everything. And I would say that it's really useful if you're a kind of an SMB, medium-sized and not too complex and not too much regulations, etc. The advantage of being able to just kind of start doing PAM and not having to buy a product, integrate it with your IGA system, it's huge. But the disadvantage then comes that, okay, but if I bought already a PAM, I may not want to use the PAM system that comes with my IGA. So it's also a little bit about where you kind of are positioned in the market space.
Hybrid approach really comes down to that hybrid capability is you may want to use all of the platform stack, or you may want to use bits and pieces. As long as that, go back to the interoperability as well and the APIs that allows you to do really strong integrations with your existing choices and existing stack that you've already decided. What about the move? There's a big move from the old, static policy based to being much more context and adaptive based policies. Is that something you've been looking at in regards to where it used to be you have a policy and that was it and it was fixed and it, would not change for a long time, to moving to much more attribute-based or fine-grain-based? How have you seen the evolution and changes in policies over the years?
Yeah, it was very interesting at the IGA last year. It was really the return of the P-back that the out Z suddenly came back. And obviously that is something you need when you have a much more flexible workforce, for example, and flexible access to applications. And the whole kind of standardization of SSO, for example, when you have new applications coming in. And there, of course, also you have the advantage of being able to use more modern models. So especially graph-based data models are kind of starting to become more standard. And that will help a lot to be able to to formulate the vision of how access should be given. And you also have all of the AI-based, where you basically create your peer groups of access and then you provide it. So it's if you 20 years ago, you had a model-on approach, make him like James.
Yep.
And now it's like, okay, we have a modelation of people who works in this kind of role, and then you get the space access, and if it's kind of in the middle, then it's totally okay. Of course, there you see a lot of very interesting ideas around access recertification, for example, that perhaps you don't, depending on your regulatory landscape, you might not need to do all that. Perhaps you should focus on the ones that are outside of the peer group. That's of course also where you see AI for onboarding is something that's coming in now that historically it almost takes as much time to onboard something to a modern stack as it took me to onboard things to Tor Accelerate 2005, because the majority of the time is all the BA time, going out and asking, okay, you want to create? Yes. You want to move? Yes. You want to leave? Okay. What should happen? Do you need disable? All of those things. So the idea that you kind of put a little AI agent there and listen in the traffic, and then you have a suggestion, because it's also that if you have a suggestion you can put on the table, that people can say yes or no. The problem is the kind of chicken and egg where you have nothing, and then you start, asking all the questions, and then it's very time consuming for the analyst as well as for the owner of the system.
Absolutely. I mean, that's, we've had lots of conversations around, how AI is impacting IGA. And I think, absolutely where you're getting it, it's in certain areas, it's evolved quite a bit, where one is the documentation. You can now interact with the documentation and get the answers you need very, very quickly. The next stage is really getting into, well, how do I take that documentation further and have the documentation create predefined configurations and policies for you? So you can say, I would like to create a policy based on this type of access for this type of role, and this is the risk that I want to make sure that I mitigate. And then the policies can be created for you. So absolutely, it's really exciting to see where where those levels and integrations and leverage of AI is going to be going. How do you see what's the future for you? What things, let's say in the next year or a couple of years, what's the future look for you when it comes to IGA? What things are you looking to be able to achieve in the coming year?
So I think one of the things we look at is also to expand the scope. So kind of, we have quite good control of the employees and the contractors and so on. But then you take another look at, okay, but how about all of the business partners? Are we handling them in a good way? And also the rise of the NHIs and non-human identities.
Yes.
Like, how do we handle that? It's also the kind of you build a good, strong core engine. And then you have all of the creative people who do things outside of the core engine that we need to start looking at. Okay, how can we kind of make sure that we don't accumulate too much risk by having people trying to solve problems in very creative ways?
Absolutely. I've seen we've had the rise of shadow IT in many years, and now we have the rise of shadow AI as well, where employees are now starting to use AI in the background, outside of the organization and IT's visibility and security's visibility. And absolutely, I think you're spot on. And we're talking about, building a very refined, robust engine. Now the question is how to make sure that everyone has a seat in that same vehicle and not creating their own little ways of getting around and their own ways of being able to access systems outside of that visibility. Because I think, it's the shadow services and applications and AI and IT that creates a lot of the pain for organizations.
Yeah, and fundamentally also that in the ITDR space is that attacker gets better and better, so we have to become better and better as well. What was okay 2 years ago. It's fascinating with MFA, for example, the fact that every time I thought that if you just implement this thing there, then it will be good. No.
Absolutely.
Then the attacker find out a new way to attack it. So, and it's a little bit that some people talk about phishing proof. I prefer phishing resistant because I'm very sure that the phishers will figure out a new way to do things.
They're always very creative. And I think you brought up, when you mentioned earlier about how attackers are using AI for phishing emails. Absolutely. And the campaigns have become so well perfected. Even, I talk regularly with the Estonian government in regards to their, strategy on reducing attacks in the country. And we used to be very dependent on the language as a protection because the language is so complicated in Estonian.
Yeah.
And now it's, the phishing emails, perfect. The Estonian grammar, it's almost like it's even better than most people actually communicate on a regular basis.
Yeah, we're almost switching over to kind of telling employees that, if it's a nice letter with good grammar, then it's most likely a phishing email. If it's badly written, then it's probably from,
Because it used to be the opposite. It used to be like spot the spelling mistakes in the grammar and bad translations, and that was the way you could. Now if it's perfect written, almost like Shakespeare.
Yeah,
you suspect it's maybe suspicious.
So and that of course, and also another very interesting area is supporting the bureaucrats. Actually, I really liked your talk about that a few years, probably a couple of years ago now. You talked about
it was a good 5 years ago now, I think it was.
So, and I think that's a very interesting area. What should the consecutiers and the have that helps you? What rights should I have? Should I have your entire right set, or should I have a subset? And how do we make sure that they have exactly rights at
Absolutely.
the right time?
I always talk about it's going that principle is privilege. It's getting into really thinking about that. I always say we talk about zero trust as a big kind of element in the security side as a framework, and then moving away from zero trust. I always talk about then you get into zero friction. If you're thinking about zero trust, you have to have as little friction as possible, because that's what enables the productivity. Also means that, it's finding that balance between training and awareness and and culture as well. But we're getting into the point where, we will now have, we talk about the agentic AI systems, and that's where we will have, in Estonia, they created the Cratbot, which is the citizens AI assistant, virtual assistant that allows you to ask the questions and get answers immediately and how to interact with the government. And I think that's what we're going to end up having is corporate kind of versions of these, AI agentic systems that will be our assistants, that will help us. I receive an email and I'd be like, I can't tell the difference. I'll say, hey, AI agent, is this a phishing email or not?
Right.
And it will then go and do all the checks in the background. So I don't need to become an employee everyone becomes a security professional. My AI agent will have the intelligence, and it can do it interactively, where I will ask it to go and check it, or it'll be autonomously, where it'll do it in the background automatically. And that's the great thing is I think Estonia definitely kind of made a jump, I would say, probably a few years ago when they made that decision. But it's exciting if I take that idea and I look at it and apply it to companies and businesses and people around the world, that becomes something exciting, especially when you look at, an IGA side of things. This person needs to move positions in the company. What, permissions should they have? What should they be removed? And be able to interact with AI that way. And I'll be able to create you a kind of a fine-grained, listen time, access, least privilege approach with the right security controls in place as well. So becoming that, really getting into where it's fully dynamic, identity and access and security all being applied.
Yeah, and it's of course in any organization of sufficient complexity and size, there's this problematic incentive that if you don't understand how things works, you can kind of make changes and then you blow things up and it's not your problem. If you actually do understand the complexity of the organization, then life becomes much harder. It's a big incentive to not understand.
Sometimes I think that's the key. So question for you, how do you stay, this is a massive area. It's always changing. It's always evolving. And I think even, the pace of acceleration of evolution's happened so much in the last couple of years. How do you stay up to date? Is there conferences that you go to that helps you? Is there communities that you're involved in, or what resources? What do you do to make sure that you've got the latest and greatest news when it comes to IGA?
So I do enjoy hanging out with other people who are interested in this strange area. So I'm engaged in a number of the community. I would say if you're in Northern Europe, you can check out my list of conferences.
Ooh. We'll make sure to add it to the show notes, because that's definitely, for the audience, I can always want to find out where's the best place to meet, or which conferences should they go to in order to find out the latest news and trends.
I discovered it was much easier to just put my notes of which conference it was in the GitHub, and then it's easy for people to find it. And you can send me a pull request if you want something added to it.
Absolutely. We'll also make sure that, one of the things is how the audience will be able to, if they've got questions or would like to connect with you, what's the best way?
Probably a shout on LinkedIn. But in general, I would say the big conferences, there is, of course, Partner IM in London, a few months, and also EIC are the big European-wide. There is also for example, Identity Beers. I run the Amsterdam Identity Beer, and we have identity beers in most places nowadays in Europe and also some in the US. So it's another way it's kind of a low effort to just go there and talk to people. And there's always a need. I'm on the board of a number of these conferences, and there's always a need for new speakers. We love to get speakers, especially from companies. And the simple fact is that usually in a year you can do 3, 4, 5 perhaps things you can investigate, if you have a decent sized team. But by going to the conferences, you can kind of talk to people that is also doing 3 or 4 things, and they usually do slightly different things. So then you can get a good idea in half an hour's talk. You can get the same kind of information that you normally would take you a 30-day proof of concept to try out.
Absolutely, that's one of the for me as well. That's I think that's for me is why I really like EIC a lot, is because for me, I come from a very security background approach to identity, and EIC is a very identity-centric view on the world that covers some security. So for me, I always really enjoy going to those, pure identity-based conferences that really kind of focuses more about the standards, the efficiencies, the productivity. And then I had to think about how do I make sure that, how do you do that with security in place, but as little friction as possible.
Yeah.
So I always find it's very, very intriguing. Even others that I think globally, Identityverse was always another great event that I've attended.
Yeah, identity merge is definitely great, but of course it requires a trip across the ocean.
It does. It was for me. It was always challenging because of the dates in June. That was never quite easiest for me to get to.
And then, of course, you have RSAC and so on. But
absolutely, but much broader than identity, though. That's the identity becomes a small part of it. Absolutely. Well, we'll make sure we get your links to the GitHub in there for the conferences. Also, the links to the Identity Beer meetups that you have, just in case anyone in the region happens to find themselves at the right time in the right place.
Yep.
Martin, it's been awesome having you on. I always really enjoy chatting with you. I enjoy your insights, and what you do in the identity space in IGA is definitely fantastic. And making sure that we make the future of organizations more flexible and more enjoyable. So thank you for everything you do. Every 2 weeks, bring you ideas, thought leadership, and fun topics to make sure that you are staying ahead and informed and making sure you're keeping your organization and the world a safer place. So thank you. Stay safe and take care. Till the next time.
Well, that's a wrap on this episode of the Security by Default podcast, where the only thing we leave unpatched is our sense of humor. I've been your host, Joseph Carson, reminding you to update your software and rotate your passwords. Subscribe, share, and review the podcast. And please stay safe, stay weird, and we'll catch you next time.